troops held captive by angry Muslims in Bosnia. Rolls-Royce Aero Engines cuts 5,000 jobs. Young rapist who was fined gets a 2-year sentence. And Yeltsin, head-to-head with opponents, clings on to power. Good evening. For the first time since British troops went into former Yugoslavia last October, a group are tonight being held captive in eastern Bosnia. 2 British armoured vehicles and a recovery vehicle are surrounded by 3,000 angry Muslims. The troops were supposed to bring out all the wounded from Konjovic Polja, but the Serbs besieging the town are only allowing women and children to leave. The Muslims say they must go back for the wounded men. ITN's Robert Moore reports.
The British escorted convoy left this morning. After days of haggling, of tense negotiations, they had been allowed into the town of Konjovic Polja to try and bring out some wounded men and some terrified refugees. The British officer in charge, Major Alan Abrahams, recognised the hazards of working on the front line here. And today, it went badly wrong. This evening, with a few of the convoy vehicles having escaped, news emerged of what happened, of angry Muslims surrounding the British vehicles, apparently enraged with the weakness of the UN effort.
The major went to see the local commander and the administration. And when they were speaking, a lot of people, several hundred, maybe 2,000 or 3,000, around and made a barrage before the car. And they couldn't move.
It's been a day of complex negotiations, with the UN commander in Bosnia, General Philippe Morion, leading the talks. By his rank and force of personality, he struggled to get the Serbs to allow 3 separate humanitarian convoys into eastern Bosnia. The Serbs refused, the aid unable to get where it's needed most. So, despite the efforts of General Morion, the convoy was again stopped. Another defeat for the United Nations, another victory of sorts for the Serbs. As the convoys stack up and wait at the crossing point, news that the British UN escorts have in effect been held hostage is another sign of the extreme difficulty of UN operations, of how even the best intentioned humanitarian tasks can go seriously wrong. Robert Moore, News at 10, on the Serbian-Bosnian border.
In a separate incident in Bosnia, a British soldier was very seriously injured by shrapnel after stepping on a mine near Gornji Vakuf. He's been flown back to Woolwich Military Hospital, where he's having urgent treatment. He hasn't been named. The aero engine maker Rolls-Royce announced 5,000 redundancies today, a tenth of its workforce. 3,000 jobs will go this year, another 2,000 next. The company blamed what it called very difficult market conditions. The Shadow Trade and Industry Secretary Robin Cook called it a tragic waste of skilled workers. The Prime Minister agreed that the job losses were distressing, but he said nannying intervention wasn't the answer. Our industrial correspondent Stephen Cape reports from the Rolls-Royce plant at Derby.
Workers spilled out of the Rolls-Royce plant in Derby, angry and shocked at the scale of the job losses in the area and with the news that 1 factory's to close.
4 years ago there was kidnapping people off the streets to work in these factories, and now they're just chucking them on the scrap heap.
It's the same as everywhere else, everybody's sick to death of it.
Throughout the day, workers were briefed on the extent of the cuts. Unions said they would fight compulsions as they considered their next move.
Against the background of having lost 2,500 jobs in the Derby group of factories, to be told that we've got to lose another 1,500 over the next 2 years was devastating news.
The aero engine giant has been hit by the continuing recession in the world airline business, coupled with the effects of the peace dividend. Hardest hit by the job losses is the Derby area, 1,545 jobs to go over 2 years. In Bristol, 1,400 will be axed. Coventry, just over 500 redundancies. At Hillington, another 500 will be lost, with other plants across the country also being hit. In London, a clash in the Commons, the Labour leader frustrated at the lack of government intervention to help Rolls-Royce.
What on earth is the point about him talking about the value of engineering skills when as Prime Minister he does nothing about the loss of 5,000 engineering skills?
It is not nannying intervention this country needs of the sort the right honourable gentleman advocates. It's the sort of supply-side measures we're taking.
And Rolls-Royce says it doesn't need any nannying. Despite the job cuts, the order book looks healthy, and the company believes it'll be well placed for the future.
And if we can stay competitive, and that's what this is all about, I mean, the way to look at this really is we're trying to preserve 47,000 jobs.
But that view doesn't help those facing redundancy in Derby. Workers say today's announcement amounts to another nail in the coffin of manufacturing industry in Britain. But managers believe the cuts are necessary to keep competitive. Rolls-Royce is one of the key employers here, but the local authority says the job losses are not fatal.
Well, up to the turn of the century, we had 7,500 new jobs created. In the medium term, we believe we have a very strong economy in the city, so it's not all doom and gloom.
Not doom and gloom. Day for 5,000 workers in Britain. 10 in Derby.
A 15-year-old boy who raped a classmate in Newport was given a new and then a judge pay £500 to Court of Appeal sentence him to 2 years in the detention centre. ITN's Joan Thurkettle reports.
This case was referred to the Court of Appeal after the girl's family, local people and MPs complained that the sentence passed in the original case had been too lenient.
The court reports were sent to Sir Nicholas Lyle, the Attorney General, who decided the case did need to be looked at again in the public interest. On his behalf, John Nutting said the boy should go to jail to mark the gravity of the offence, to emphasise the disapproval of the public and to protect women and young girls.
Further criticised for saying that the girl should receive £500 so she could have a good holiday get over the of the case.
That, said Mr. Patrick Harrington, representing the boy, may have been inappropriate, but he said Judge John Prosser was worried about the effect a lengthy prison term might have on a young boy of previous character. He'd also been in Cardiff prison for 2 weeks, where the judge had heard he'd shared a cell with a man accused of serious homosexual offences against teenage boys. The Lord Justice, Lord Taylor, described some of the judge's remarks as infelicitous, to say the least, but he didn't deserve the vilification to which he'd been subjected. Nevertheless, a non-custodial sentence was not tenable. Under the Criminal Justice Act, the 15-year-old will serve less than a year before he's released under supervision.
The boy was in court with his parents. He turned to his solicitor and asked, "Have I got 2 years?" He was choking back the tears and was visibly flushed. He turned and had a quiet word with his father before being led off to the cells. The parents refused to talk to the press. Their solicitor said they were very disappointed. Joan Thurkettle, News at 10 at the High Court.
President Yeltsin's authority suffered a series of damaging blows today, and tonight his hold on power looks shakier than ever. The Russian parliament is to scrap his plans for a referendum on who is running the country, and they've agreed in principle to reduce the president's powers. It appears to be only a matter of time now. One Yeltsin supporter said the situation borders on the catastrophic. Here's our Moscow correspondent James Mates.
2 years Yeltsin boxed Mikhail Gorbachev into a corner and never let him go. Tonight he's in a very similar corner himself and seems to have no idea how to get out. Does he go quietly like Gorbachev did, or does he use force to try and reimpose his authority?
It was apparently no accident that the first men greeted by the president this morning were his ministers of defense, security and the interior, the men whose support he would need if he was ever to try and rule by decree. That was Yeltsin playing tough, but it was followed immediately by Yeltsin pleading with his opponents to compromise, to share power rather than try to run the country without him.
I'm ready for any form of dialogue, for any agreement, in any legal form.
His opponents were having none of it. The Speaker of Parliament, Ruslan Hasbulatov, whipped hardliners into a frenzy with his denunciations of the Yeltsin government. Just 3 months ago, these same delegates had promised Yeltsin they'd ask the people who should run Russia. Today, they reneged on that promise, voting by more than 3 to 1 to cancel the referendum and award even more power to themselves. The two rivals met in animated conversation on the platform, then retired behind closed doors for one final session of talks. But Yeltsin got nowhere. Hasbulatov, a man who has thwarted Yeltsin's reforms at every turn, emerged, his face wreathed in smiles. He knew this was his day. Yeltsin returned to the chamber to face the wrath of his enemies, but when one demanded he be dismissed from office, the president decided he'd heard enough. He walked out, and within minutes his press spokesman was saying enough is enough. Calling in the army and imposing presidential rule is, he says, still a possibility.
Presidential rule would suit the president very well.
As he left this evening, the president's face was a picture of gloom. He seems genuinely undecided about what to do next. There is any way he can keep his reforms on track without resorting to undemocratic methods.
Western leaders are belatedly rallying around. A meeting of the leading industrialized nations this weekend will discuss what can be done for Russia's reformers. But Yeltsin's opponents are hardline former communists, and they care very little about Western opinion. This is James Mates, live for News at 10 in Moscow.
Here, the Health Secretary Virginia Bottomley tried to calm affairs today about where NHS money is going. She agreed that hard decisions had to be taken, but said there'd be no rationing Armageddon. She told doctors they should be more involved in where money is spent. A survey out today showed the differences between the public, the doctors and NHS managers about what they want. Our Home Affairs correspondent Jennifer Nadel reports.
The government calls it priority setting. Doctors call it rationing. The end result the same. It means limiting access to healthcare because there isn't enough money to go round. For the first time today, it was debated in public, with the Health Secretary accepting that it was necessary.
Sensible practitioners and politicians have known all along decisions about priorities have to be taken. They've always had to be taken, and they will have to be taken.
Hard decisions will mean hard choices. This premature baby has already cost the health service £54,500. That's enough to provide 18 patients like Jenny Nihill with a new hip. She's on a waiting list.
I can't walk very far. I wake up in the night with pain in the legs and, you know, waiting so long. I could be dead, or I could even be a cripple or something like that, you know.
Her wait might be long, but at least she will eventually get treated. If rationing is introduced, some patients may have to go without. According to a BMA poll released today, a majority in Britain want unlimited NHS, even taxes. But doctors believe some form of rationing is now inevitable and say the government
have on occasions treated patients where if we were in a ration we might not the parent who might well survive, be perfectly healthy and have a naturally happy life. How can you ration them? I believe the government has to where the rationing is drawn.
Today's debate has brought the whole issue of health rationing into the open, and the government's acknowledgement that some form of priority setting is needed is likely to be seen as a tacit admission that the NHS is unable to deliver all the services it was set up to provide. Jennifer Nadel, News at 10, Central London.
The multi-million-pound computer system, which was supposed to revolutionise the London Stock Exchange, cost 220 people their jobs today, including that of the exchange's chief executive. The rest were made redundant. The computer is still not working. 18 could have replaced paper documents. Business correspondent.
In London's dealing rooms, millions of shares are traded in the blinking of an eye. In comparison, the mechanism for actually transferring the ownership of shares and paying for them, the settlement system, has all the sophistication of quill, pen and ledger. The new system was supposed to replace paper share certificates with electronic records of ownership, saving over £200 million over 10 years. But after more than a decade of planning, the market ended up with Taurus, a horrendously complex system which was still unable to perform certain basic functions. The stock exchange denies incompetence.
I think that's overdoing it. I mean, clearly we have failed. We are therefore to blame, and I totally accept that. But to say that it was incompetence throughout, I think is excessive.
It's now up to the Bank of England to find a replacement for a system estimated to have cost the city £400 million. A task force will report by the end of June. Share trading abandoned the floor of the stock exchange for the high-tech dealing room nearly 7 years ago, but the settlement system remains stuck firmly in the past.
London still accounts for the vast bulk of share trading in Europe.
but centres like Frankfurt and Paris have already updated their settlement systems, stealing an important march in the battle to replace London as Europe's financial centre. Greg Wood, News at 10 in the City.
Next tonight, Europe's fish wars continue in the North Sea. A special report on the Red Army Mafia taking over in Berlin. And progress against Alzheimer's disease, though for some, it's too late.
Lots of people refer to it as a living bereavement. I never like to think of that because I've still got Connie. And even though she's like this, I mean, it's still my Connie.
In 1970, one man took a giant leap for mankind. At the time, it seemed almost impossible to believe that BP could find oil in the North Sea. BP are still out there today, finding oil and gas for all our tomorrows.
Welcome to a city that stretches as far as the eye can see, where no one has ever been stopped for speeding, where a real British breakfast is served hundreds of times a day, and people still take tea in the afternoon. Welcome to a city where the office is in the country, and you're seldom far from a public telephone. Welcome to a city where every year millions of visitors are greeted with a friendly punch by gentlemen who still wear hats. Welcome to Intercity.
Not so fast, Von Ryan. These have always brought me luck.
White diamonds, the intriguing new fragrance from Elizabeth Taylor.
Annual Achiever Award. Who'd have thought it a year ago? You see, I've been at NatWest for 20 years, quite happy when, I don't know, I started to feel that perhaps I needed something new, a change. Then someone suggested moving into pensions and life. Well, at first, the training was hard, I'll admit. A bit like being back at school. At my age. But I passed with flying colours, so to speak, and I was out on the road. And then, do you know what really stood me in good stead? It was my 20 years at the bank. I knew about people, you see. That's what I do now, really. Go out, meet people, sort out their problems. I've never looked back, never looked back. How NatWest changed my life, never looked back. You could use that in one of your advertisements. Never looked back, never looked back.
Fishermen tonight stepped up their unofficial guerrilla war against cheap fish imports, throwing a road blockade around the port of Grimsby. It's to stop lorries getting to market in the morning with fish from Russia, Norway or France. The French fellow EC members are being targeted because they have been destroying British fish. Hywel Jones has our report.
Grimsby's docks are quiet tonight, waiting for the night's catch. More than ever, though, the foreign catch from France or Russia will meet hostility or worse. In the pubs and clubs, the day's been spent mulling over resentment of the cheap imports, undercutting these fishermen's takings by up to 50%.
The action going to be started from next week on Norwegian and Russian fish.
Yeah, anything that comes through will be stopped and turned away.
Attempted to,
to put pickets on the gates or something, and whoever, get everyone in hold together and other ports to try and do the same and get it stopped.
There's new evidence tonight that the fish war is not just taking place on the dockside, as with this confrontation between a British fishing vessel and a Dutch trawler.
He gave us 3 warnings. He said if we don't alter our course and get out of his way, he was going to ram us. And on the 3rd occasion, he did actually turn towards us and try. He missed us by about 10 yards.
Confrontations like that only increase fishermen's determination to keep foreign fish out. That determination to keep cheap imports off these docks has now reached a more formal level than simply overturning crates of fish or arguing with lorry drivers. Tomorrow, the National Fishermen's Federation meets here in Grimsby to plan its campaign against the importers. That campaign will try to diffuse some of the tension which is gripping these docks with every night's catch. Howell Jones, News at 10, Grimsby.
Pharmaceutical companies have developed a new sort of drug for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease, one of the curses of old age for many British families. It accelerates aging and leads to memory loss, confusion and dementia. Experts aren't pinning too many hopes on the development, but they say they're confident that within the next generation there'll be something to control the condition. ITN's Penny Marshall reports.
Come on, darling.
The tragedy Les faces is every day, and it's in his home. It's his wife.
Connie was always a beautiful person. I showed you the picture of Connie. She was a lovely looking girl.
Connie's only 57. She's one of Britain's 600,000 Alzheimer patients. It's like watching a child, Les says. After 37 years of marriage and 2 children, she's now my little girl. The new class of drug, which is not yet licensed, will come too late to help advanced sufferers like Connie. But in trials, it has offered mild relief to 40% of patients. It's not a wonder cure, but could herald more effective arresting treatments for the next generation.
I'm optimistic that the 30s generation will at least be able to have the onset of their Alzheimer's disease delayed so substantially that it won't have the kind of impact on the latter part of the lifespan that it does now.
These pensioners enjoy good health, but for those less fortunate, the Alzheimer's Disease Society today announced more than £1 million for research. This follows a recent study showing GPs missed some 50% of cases and misdiagnosed a further 20%. It was devastating for Les when his wife was diagnosed 4 years ago.
Lots of people refer to it as a living bereavement. I never like to think of that because I've still got Connie. And even though she's like this, I mean, it's still my Connie as far as I'm concerned.
Today, Connie has her husband to help her face Alzheimer's, but her children may yet have a drug to help prevent it.
Other news, health authorities are to get new guidelines from the government on when they should reveal that one of their medical staff has the HIV virus. The idea is to protect patients. In 2 recent cases, helplines have had to be set up after it was disclosed that 2 doctors had the virus. Ford dropped its plans for compulsory redundancy today. It said an upturn in sales meant it didn't have to lose so much labour. The unions who had been considering strikes called it a victory for the workers. 3 South Wales police officers remain suspended tonight following the acquittal of 2 brothers who'd already served 6 years for murder. The murder victim was the manageress of a sex shop, not a prostitute, as we reported on Tuesday. Tonight's special foreign report is on the legacy left to Germany by the Red Army. Troops from Russia who occupied East Germany for nearly half a century are now heading home. But many are leaving without their weapons. They're being sold for cash, and deserters are linking up with Russian criminal gangs now operating in Berlin and in Moscow. This report from Berlin is by Europe correspondent Libby Wiener.
In the shadow of the Brandenburg Gate, near to where the Berlin Wall once stood, there's now a brisk trade in Soviet memorabilia. But it's not the Red Army's only legacy. The police here believe the city is facing a crime wave, instigated by a new mafia linked to Moscow, run with the help of former soldiers. The detective heading Berlin's newly formed organised crime unit says the city he polices is facing a dangerous new phenomenon.
We are convinced that it is organised crime, and if you want to say mafia, because we see that there are acting several gangs which were founded in Russia or other countries of the former Soviet union.
Suspicions were first aroused when a dozen officers based in Germany were caught red-handed, bringing weapons back to Moscow. It's thought to supply the mafia there. Since then, the Berlin police have recovered arms caches, including anti-tank missiles, several hundred grenades, and nearly 1,000 guns and automatic rifles. Organised kidnapping is also growing. This police video shows 3 Ukrainian suspects detained in a raid on a safe house where they'd been holding a businessman hostage, demanding a huge ransom for his release.
The wall may have gone, but in many senses, Berlin is still the place in Europe where East meets West. A wealthy outpost that's seen as a source of rich pickings by organised crime gangs based further east. Russians, Poles and Yugoslavs are all said to be operating in the city, where crime, not communism, is now considered the big danger.
At the gates of the Soviet barracks, police regularly find dealers offering stolen cars for sale. They believe the market where soldiers are now allowed to mingle freely is the contact point for the Russian mafia, who try to entice them into crime. But according to the general in charge of the barracks, any corruption has now been dealt with. He blames Russian exiles living in Berlin. It's these immigrants who commit crimes against our soldiers. There are no special mafia structures. With or without their help, the police are convinced the Moscow mafia has gained a foothold here. In 2 years' time, all the soldiers will be gone. The fear is the crime gangs will remain. Libby Wiener, News at 10, Berlin.
And finally, proof that you can pick up a bargain at a car boot sale. An American tourist bought this picture at a sale in Devon last year. It turned out to be ruby heads with apple blossoms by the 19th century American artist Martin Johnson Head. The tourist had paid the princely sum of £2 for the picture. Tonight at Christie's in New York, he sold it for £67,000. That's News at 10 tonight. Our apologies to viewers in some areas who experienced picture disturbance early in this program. That was a problem beyond our control. Until tomorrow, from all of us here, good night.
Good evening. Well, after the mildest day of the year so far in places in the south, tonight a series of fronts flirting with western areas will produce some very patchy rain or drizzle, so that come the early hours it'll be cloudy and mild out to the west, misty but rather cold for the east. And this east-west split very much remains with us as we go into tomorrow. So kicking off with the eastern side of the country, here we see the early morning mist disappearing very rapidly, and it'll settle into a good, pleasant day, very much like today, though possibly clouding over later on. Now, generally speaking, there'll be a lot more in the way of cloud out to the west, a few bright slots as well, and some bits and pieces of rain or drizzle, but the high pressure tending to kill this off. Temperature-wise, another mild day, a high of around about 14 or 50, just nudging it into the 60s, but a lot breezier, especially so out to the west. Now, inspired by these springtime conditions, I thought we'd take a very quick look at our European chart for the weekend. And the Ski Club of Great Britain tell me there's good spring skiing for many areas. And if you're in search of the sun, head to the south, down into the Med, high 60s, into the 70s. But more cloud and rain for northern as well as western areas. That's all from me for another day. I leave you with a summary. Good night.
You're so Friday feeling. You just can't keep it in.
Smokey has his favourites. His toys. His playmate. Me and his favourite Whiskers varieties. Now there's even more from Whiskers. New select cuts. Individual meaty pieces. Succulent, juicy and delicious. Another of Smokey's favourites. New Whiskers select cuts.
Big box powders can fade colours and sometimes have problems with tough stains like bolognese. But now, from Ariel Colour, there's a remarkable new liquid that can treat and wash away stains. So does it work better on this fatty stain? We've asked 2 powder users to see. You wash with powder and you get pre-treating. And after one wash, here are our models.
No model could wear this.
You're right. A new Ariel Colour liquid?
It worked.
Of course. And being Ariel Colour, it's great for colours. New Ariel Colour liquid can treat and wash away stains without washing away colour.
Fresh, clean, Old Spice.
Good afternoon. I'm a businessman and I need some money to buy an oil field.
Well, I can let you have £10.
£10? You must be joking. Can I see your manager, please?
Can I help you, sir?
What? He's not your manager. He's just a kid.
Yes, a whiz kid.
With a fully fledged manager in every branch, Yorkshire Bank will give you a business-like response when you need help with your business.
£15.
Yorkshire Bank. Everything you need from a bank and nothing you don't need.
No pain, no gain. Dr. Hilary Jones puts our marathon runners through their paces, and it's your last chance to win a trip to the Oscars. Tomorrow on GMTV.
Hello, good evening. Relatives of the 5 workers who died in a huge explosion at a West Yorkshire chemical plant say they're considering suing the company. Verdicts of accidental death were today returned on all 5 victims of the blast at the Hickson and Welsh factory in Castleford. They were killed when a tank used for distilling chemicals was cleaned for the first time in 30 years.
The inquest heard that the blast in the tank had caused a jet of flame to shoot across the yard of the plant, engulfing a prefab building in flames and setting fire to the office block where one of the 5 victims, 18-year-old Sarah Atkinson, was found in the toilet. No tests had been carried out on what was inside the tank before cleaning started, and the jury also heard evidence that Hickson and Welsh had been in breach of its fire certificate. In his summing up, the coroner, Philip Gill, told the jury there'd been no evidence of any criminal negligence on the part of Hickson and Welsh. What happened was an accident, and the only appropriate verdict was one of accidental death. The jury took just over 2 hours to record verdicts of accidental death in all 5 cases.
The events of the 21st of September will never be forgotten, as we will never forget those who died. The lessons of the incident have been and will be learned and acted upon.
Families of the victims say they're now considering their own legal action.
The jury's finding today represents a damning indictment of health and safety at Hickson and Welsh, a damning indictment of fire safety at Hickson and Welsh. The jury clearly understood the serious implications of what they were hearing in the expert evidence.
Our daughter went to work quite healthy. She never came back. So someone is responsible. You know, it's not just what you can call a normal accident, is it? So something's gone wrong somewhere. And hopefully we'll find out eventually what that was.
The Health and Safety Executive says it's now studying the evidence brought out at the inquest and considering what further action to take against Hickson and Welsh.
The new East Coast Cod War intensified tonight as local trawlermen extended their blockade to catches from Russian and Norwegian ships. Pickets have been out again at Grimsby docks trying to prevent foreign fishermen from landing their catches.
They're angry that cheap imports are being dumped on local markets, causing prices to plummet. They've already barred French fish and have now been involved in skirmishes with trawlermen from Holland. A crisis meeting to discuss the latest escalation is being held tomorrow. The director of a wheel clamping company accused of blackmailing motorists has walked free from court after the charges against him were thrown out. The prosecution was being seen as a test case.
Simon Renshaw-Smith from Vehicle Control Services was accused of demanding money with menaces from two drivers whose cars had been clamped in Sheffield. However, when he faced committal proceedings in court, the examining magistrate decided the case should be thrown out.
Through the contact and the continual correspondence that was passed backwards and forwards from both the police and our legal representatives. And I think with that evidence to hand, it proved that at all times, both myself and my company, Vehicle Control Services Limited, were acting as they thought and felt the law stood.
It was regarded as a legal test case, and the court ruling is seen as giving the green light to clamping companies.
Jim Greensmith reporting. Plans for a national day of action embracing pit and rail unions were dealt a blow today when the Pit Deputies Union NACONS voted narrowly against taking part. 64% of deputies were in favour of the strike, but that's 2% short of the required two-thirds majority. The 24-hour stoppage will be held on April the 2nd, to coincide with a Europe-wide day of action against unemployment.
The European Trade Union Congress has called upon all its affiliated organisations to join in a day of protest on the 2nd of April. Effectively, it looks like all the mining industries of Europe are going to take part in the 24-hour stoppage on that day. And so we shall certainly not be on our own.
A head teacher has appealed to parents to keep tighter control on their children after two 15-year-old boys were convicted of plotting to blow up a school. The attack at the William Farr School at Yeltsin near Lincoln caused nearly £500,000 worth of damage. The boys are said to have got the idea from a video. The court heard how they tried to set the school alight using Bunsen burners, and when that failed, they petrol bombed it. The youths will be sentenced later. A pioneering new bus system aimed at making inner-city traffic congestion a thing of the past has been unveiled in Leeds today. The guided busways are the first in the country and use a special track so that buses can bypass traffic jams. The council hopes to build them on all major commuter routes into the city. Work on the first track starts in November. And finally, soccer, and the York City manager John Ward could be on the move. Ward, who's taken York from the foot of the third division to the brink of promotion in the last 14 months, has been offered the manager's job at Bristol Rovers. No word yet on whether he'll take up the offer. And that's it from the Calendar team tonight. We're back in GMTV. The next update, 6:15. Until then, a very good night.